And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast and happy holidays to everyone. And today we have an old friend returning to the show, Chris Stonnell of Post Mortem Players. Today we're going to be talking about this year's production of Christmas Spirits, horror themed the horror themed production of creepy plays that are very much apropos to the Christmas holiday because usually when you think of Christmas, you think of scary ghost stories. But before we dive in, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please share this video with all of your family and friends and foes as well. And spirits on the air, we definitely encourage you to take a look at our episodes because there are a few that you may enjoy watching. But let's go ahead and dive in. Chris, my man, how has your week been so far? How have you been since we last spoke?
Oh, can't complain. Been doing pretty good.
Excellent. Now, for y'all who haven't seen it, Chris, you originally came on in October to talk about Post Mortem Players. And if you haven't seen that episode yet, I'll have a link down in the description below. But you did mention that every Christmas you do a horror themed play called Christmas Spirits. So before we dive in, you did mention that postmortem was pretty much influenced by the Grand Guignol of the 19th and early 20th century. Can you maybe dive a little bit into what that is, because that pretty much informs what your production company does in terms of of plays and dramas.
Yeah, so the Grand Guignol in Paris, it's sort of what gave me the confidence that I knew something like this could work, because it worked for almost 70 years in Paris. And there are all kinds of reasons for why it ended, but I felt like at this point in time, the appetite would be there for this type of theater to kind of make a little bit of a resurgence, just with the popularity of the horror genre between movies and TV series. I mean, it's probably never been as popular as it is right now. I thought this would be, and also a little bit with the kind of the backlash to CGI and that kind of the desire to see those old, practical effects come back, which was a lot of the reason for the Grand Guignol's demise was, what they were able to start doing on films, they couldn't compete with on stage. Where I think now there's, people are more willing to suspend their disbelief to see practical effects because of just how much they're tired of really bad CGI.
Right. Well, what's fascinating? What's fascinating is that is that what the Grand Guignol did on stage. At least in early filmmaking, it translated very, very well into early horror films like Nosferatu, Caligari. I mean, it's aesthetic, its tone, just the way that the stories were told. It was just so brilliant.
Yeah. It influenced almost all early horror films, and even continuing from there. I mean, so much of what that theater kind of pioneered went on. As I said, just influenced many writers and filmmakers and theater artists. Initially, it was rooted in realism. So what you think is kind of crazy when you think of horror, what could be further from realism a lot of times.
Right.
But the Grand Guignol did not, like for me, like a Christmas Spirits right now, this supernatural story, that was not Grand Guignol. Grand Guignol was trying to create stories that were realistic horror things that could be ripped from the headlines and then put on stage. And that's a lot of the early plays. They would scour the newspapers, and there were these things called the faits divers that came out each day that were like illustrated versions of these like just gory crime stories. So true crime is very popular even in the early 90s.
Yeah, exactly.
And
I mean,
they would take these and turn them into stage productions. A lot of these stories ripped right from the headlines.
Now, another thing I want to ask you, and if you don't know, that's fine. Did they did the Grand Guignol have any influence on the Penny Dreadfuls that were coming out at that time, because they were very, very popular?
It was all very hand in hand. One, I assume one kind of influenced the other. With the Grand Guignol, so much just this ultra realism on stage. There are no supernatural elements to the Grand Guignol. And so it was founded, as I mentioned, it wasn't founded as a horror theater. It was named after one of the Punch and Judy characters named named Guignol. which was literally Grand Guignol translates to big puppet. So it was basically going to be this realistic theater, this slice of life theater. And then, they started kind of working in these horror things and saw that, hey man, this is really catching on. And so then by the early, 1900s, they had gone all forward into this horror theater. They had the perfect location. They were in this little church on this little dead end alley called Rue Chaptal. They're just walking distance away from like the red light district, like near the Moulin Rouge and everything, that kind of area of Paris. And was a really dark, dimly lit street. So it's on to walking kind of this seedy part of town down this dark alleyway to get to this theater, of course, lit up with gaslight. They were ready for horror by the time they even walked in the front doors. And the space was a converted church. And there are these they talk about these statues of these like angels kind of towering over the stage, looking down on the audience. So just the mood and the setting and everything just lent itself for what they would see on stage. They perfected this procedure they called hot and cold showers, where you say they would do 3 shows a night. All the Grand Guignol plays are kind of like roughly one act horror plays. So they would do multiple in one evening. They would start with the horror play. Then the middle play would always be some sort of slapstick sex farce, to get the audience just totally laughing and lower their defenses. And then the third show, they would hit them with the absolute, the coup de grace of the evening, the big horror play. A lot of stuff that say people like Alfred Hitchcock or William Castle would take on later, they pioneered that as well, because they would have, whether or not they were real or not, a supposed nurse on duty or doctors in the house, to take care of people who were fainting or vomiting. And, and there could be people they planted there to intentionally faint just to raise that tension. So there was lots of that building in, and it became this really popular experience. Everyone, no trip to Paris was complete without going to see a play at the Grand Guignol. One of their great kind of stage managers, he was known for all the different types of blood. He created different recipes for blood for all different occasions, whether you want it to be runny or to splatter or to coagulate or to be really thick. He knew all the recipes. And of course that would then translate into, of course, all the blood effects in a lot of our horror films with the practical effects and things. And, another really neat thing about the Grand Guignol, when we think about equity, even though a lot of their plays were pretty misogynistic, they were at the same time a little bit progressive, because the most famous performer ever in the Grand Guignol was an actress named Paula Maxa, who she was the star of the theater. And she has this famous monologue where she talks about all the different ways she had been killed over the years on stage. And then also one of the later managers of the theater, the theater directors, was a woman, which was very rare at the time to have a woman leading a theater company. So it was just a fascinating theater, and a lot of those plays, a lot of them still existed. A lot of them have been translated into English. Our very first Post Mortem Players' very first production, we did 3 short plays. And the third one was, a staple of the Grand Guignol. We brought back and did a version of it there up in Concord.
Well, I was going to say, because the way you were describing those 3 plays that they did, it's actually reminiscent of the way that dramas were staged in ancient Greece, because you had something that was pretty heavy at the beginning, and then you had the light satyr slapstick farce play, and then you kind of and then to use your time, you would deliver the coup de grace with the with the third one. So it's something that's been tried and tested, for centuries, really.
Yeah, and I'll say in a way, Grand Guignol owes to Greek tragedy, because there's nothing, we talk about horrors on stage with Oedipus's eyes gouged out and all those things. The difference is that where in Greek tragedy, all the horrific things happened off stage and were just commented on. Oh, by the way, this just happened. Grand Guignol, they brought it to the stage where you then saw those horrific acts happening on stage.
You bring it into the light, and what's interesting too is that Grand Guignol, for me, Grand Guignol is when I read about it, my first thought was this is the theater of the subversive. Like
Mhm.
this is, this was to stage, in the 19th century what Python was to TV in the 60s,
Yeah,
because it was very much in your face, and it was very, and what struck me was the fact that it was very intelligent, because you would think that something that was so bloody would be campy and stupid, but there was some level of intelligence to what they were doing.
for sure. As I tell, and a lot of it was used as social commentary. A lot you can trace the plays of the Grand Guignol based on what the fears were of the population in Paris at the time. So a lot of it, we look at it today with modern eyes, and we see a lot of things we would consider xenophobia. But at the time, those were the things that the people in Paris were afraid of. And we can kind of take those, and so many of them are very customizable. We can take away this the fear of whatever it was they had, and put a more modern spin on it. Because a lot, like a famous Grand Guignol play was sort of a reaction to new technology, which was a famous play called The Telephone, which is about a guy who he's at home, and he's talking, and he's about to go out of town. And then the horror of the play is when his family calls him out of town, and he hears his family being murdered over the telephone, and he's helpless to do anything about it because he's now so far away. So there's there's something like that, which obviously as technology is changing every day, there's definitely ways you can put that and put a modern spin on that, on a play like that.
Really, if you think about it, the telephone was to them what Terminator is to us, because it's very much telling of what technology could do if we don't keep it in check. So I wanted to ask you. So how did so when you learned about this type of theater, and you kind of ingested it, what elements of it did you take from it, and thought, maybe this is worth having a go. Maybe I can try to translate this and bring it into the 21st century North Carolina.
Yeah, well, one of it is just the plays that exist. No one has seen them. Unless you're just someone who's seeking out Grand Guignol, which is very, very few people. These productions would be brand new to everyone. It's not theater they're used to. They've seen horror theater. A lot of thrillers like A Wait Until Dark, or things like that, or like the dusty old Dracula stage productions and things. But these like really horrific shows, they haven't seen them, because there's always been this fear to it won't translate to the stage, or that the audience will laugh at it and won't be terrified anymore, because modern audiences are now desensitized to this. Where I think maybe some of that is true, but I think they would love to see blood effects, and even if they're not terrified by it, but if they enjoy it and get excited, and even if they do laugh, I think there's a way they can still appreciate the material, and really enjoy what they're seeing. Because there's so many people who love horror, and I think if you can kind of get to that level of practical effects on stage, I think they'll love to come into the theater where it's happening in front of them, rather than having sort of the safety of seeing it on the screen, where you're a little bit even further removed than you would be, say, in the audience at a theater, when you're in the same space with what's going on. I think it just adds a whole different. It's kind of like going to a haunted house, in October, when you're right there and all these things are happening around you. It's not quite to that level. If that's one extreme and movies are the other extreme, we're right, there in the middle.
Right. So I did want to ask you about the production of the plays. So are you so when you're producing these plays, are they set in the time period in which they were written, or are they kind of adapted to modern times for modern sensibilities?
Yeah. So kind of our first productions, like a year ago, October, we did 3 short plays. We didn't do the hot and cold showers. We kind of just did 3 horror plays, even though what we did was we ramped the horror up a little bit each time. The 3 we did, we all set them kind of in the time period they were originally written in. But there are plenty of others that with the time to adapt and to work on them, their changes could be made. And I would like to do that, because there's some of those plays that are really well done. They just it's, once again, they were written in the early 20th century, and so they won't connect as well as they're written, whether it's due to things that are no longer appropriate in this day and age, or
Right.
or just some of the stilted language might need a little bit of a refresh. So the audience, because you don't want the audience trying to, in a play like that, having to, keep thinking of the lines to understand what they're saying. It's better if it, easily flows out and they can easily, keep up with what's happening. I don't want it's not like going to see, I don't want it to be like going to see Shakespeare where you have to really listen.
Right.
These plays they're not high art, and so I don't want to have a high art level script for someone coming to a horror play.
But at the same time, I mean, you also want to keep true to the spirit of the play.
Exactly.
It's yeah. I was just thinking, can you imagine just how befuddled your audience would be if they had to hear about a prostitute from Ceylon? It's like, what the hell are they talking about? It's like, obviously no one uses the word Ceylon anymore.
Yes.
So this year, you're going to be producing your play The Innocents by William Archibald. So where are you right now on that? Because that's coming out in the next few weeks, right?
Yeah. So it opens in 2 weeks. So they are kind of getting to the culminating part of rehearsals. Right before we go into then kind of dress rehearsal week here in a little over a week from now. So it's coming far along right now. But I think I think scripts have to go away here in the next couple of days, and they have to be off book and have all lines memorized. But it's going very well. We talked about Grand Guignol. I mean, the other, that was one of my goals, was to kind of bring Grand Guignol back out and and reintroduce that to the general public. The other thing is ghost stories. And I really love the tradition of ghost stories at Christmas. And so it's another thing that I really wanted to be core to Post Mortem, was to really make an effort to bring that tradition back as well and give people an alternative to the typical Christmas programming. And so this is our second year of doing a ghost story at Christmas. Last year we did 4 Victorian Edwardian ghost stories that I adapted for the stage. And then this year we're doing, you mentioned The Innocents by William Archibald, which was an adaptation of Henry James's The Turn of the Screw,
Right.
One of the most often adapted and most popular ghost stories of all time. And in this version played Broadway in the early 1950s. And then if the name sounds familiar, it's because it was the play version that was then adapted into the 1961 movie The Innocents, which if you look at any list of top horror movies of all time or ghost movies of all time, The Innocents is always somewhere near the top of those lists as one of these great and they filmed it in black and white even in the 60s. Horror, Gothic with a tinge of Southern Gothic horror movies, even though it takes place in England. And that's because for the film version, they hired the great Truman Capote to rewrite the screenplay for the film.
So when you got started with Christmas Spirits, how exactly did you go about choosing which story you wanted to adapt? Because I mean, because in this day and age, you're pretty much spoiled for choice. You've got so many. You've got so many. It's just like, my God, you can get a headache just trying to figure this out.
Oh yeah, and it's good. I mean, I'd rather have more choices than not enough choices. And the good thing about no one else having to kind of caught on to this idea yet is that a lot of the ghost story plays that exist, if other theaters are doing them, they're typically doing them as their Halloween fare. So everyone's doing their family-friendly Christmas shows this time of year. So it gives me the opportunity. I can kind of come in and do one of these shows with very little. I don't want to say opposition because we're all part of the same team for the most part, but I'm not worried about others doing necessarily these ghost stories. And and there's so many of them. Last year I chose because since we were brand new, I didn't have a lot of initial funds to pay the royalties to do an existing show, so it was my opportunity to take some of my favorite ghost stories and adapt them for the stage last year. And so it was a lot of work, but it was really fun. And that was sort of my introduction to the audiences about, the traditional Christmas ghost stories. And so I also tried to pick ones for the most part that were set at Christmas. That didn't matter so much as part of the tradition of telling the stories, but I felt to bring it back to the audience, if I could find then from some of those that actually had Christmas settings, it would help as well. And so I think 3 of the 4 ghost stories had Christmas settings, and the other one, was about as cold and dark as possible. So it worked as well. And that one was a Charles Dickens called The Signal Man, which I thought would be great to include that because A, it's such a really great story, but B, everyone who knows Dickens only for his A Christmas Carol ghost story would be surprised to see, oh yeah, here's a much darker ghost story from Charles Dickens.
So, and the thing that I find so interesting about Christmas ghost stories is the fact that it's something that we really don't do here in the States, these days. But I remember, I remember my history classes and language classes. This was something that they did in Europe all the time, every year. I mean, do you think you can speak as to why we just don't make it a tradition here? Is it because we're just too religious, or what?
I mean, some of it is. I mean, there's multiple reasons. I mean, one is technology itself. Now that we have electric lights, and whatever's happening outside, we doesn't matter too much to us because we have heat in our houses, and where you think back, when these stories were at their heyday, the end of December was a very dark time. I mean, think about the shortest day of the year is December 21st. And by that point, the crops had all been harvested, and there was a lot of just huddling around the fireplace in the darkness at night. And so just let's talk about mood and feeling for ghost stories. That was the perfect time. And so to them, that time, that shortest day of the year, that was the point when the veil between the two worlds was the shortest. And they're supposedly the dead were free to kind of roam amongst the living during that time. And Christmas wasn't as major of a holiday as it is today. In some ways, Charles Dickens wrote probably the most famous Christmas ghost story of all time, but also that work itself also in some ways spelled the demise of the Christmas ghost story, because a lot of these Christmas traditions we hold near and dear were things that we kind of copied from Dickens' A Christmas Carol. When there was sort of a push then to be around that time period, to be charitable and to help out those less fortunate, and to have this kind of warm family Christmas where before Christmas was, it was sort of a holiday to get drunk and just debauched parties, and then it kind of had that transition post A Christmas Carol to kind of form into the holiday that we see it as today. So that's those are some of the reasons, and and also Halloween wasn't a thing. Halloween, Christmas was their Halloween for many years. It was Halloween was kind of an American thing because as we were building into our holidays, Christmas had already sort of had gone through that A Christmas Carol transformation, and then bringing over sort of the I think it was Irish immigrants who brought over the kind of traditions that then became our Halloween. And now you see, and so even in Great Britain to the modern day, ghost stories are still a major part. There's a great series called A Ghost Story for Christmas that I really highly recommend anybody searches for, where every Christmas Eve, the BBC would show a ghost story. And in the last few years, Mark Gatiss of Sherlock fame has sort of resurrected that series and has premiered multiple ghost stories a ghost story a year. And this year this year's edition is going to be a ghost story by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle called Lot 249, and I think that's going to premiere in December, maybe on right around Christmas Eve again. I think if you have BritBox, you can watch it there, but. So that's still a tradition there, and then they've noticed in sort of cultural exchange, Great Britain has now started to you start to see them embracing Halloween a little bit more, but Christmas is still that time of the year where ghost stories reign supreme.
So you see yourself as sort of the guardian of this ancient tradition of telling horror or ghost stories, I should say, on Christmas then.
Yeah, and for sure, or just providing for people who want something different. I can't remember if I told this story in one of my previous visits, but in the late kind of mid 2000s, there was an article in the Observer back when the Charlotte Observer used to have a full-time theater critic, and they were just lamenting the critics, the role of the critic in December, because they said essentially we're reviewing the same 4 productions every year. and there are all these family Christmas things, and we just would love to see something different or something alternative, or even something more for adults. And so I kind of took that as a kind of a call to arms, as the opportunity to add something, and this was, I think this is at least 15, 16 years ago. So like a friend of mine who's a great writer, we determined we were going to try to write. At first, we were going to kind of, in a way, kind of parody the vampire movie 30 Days of Night. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that movie or not, but the premise is that you're in Barrow, Alaska, where it's dark for like, a month at a time in December. And so what a perfect place for vampires to show up at. And, because they never have to worry about sunlight for an entire month. So it's like a all you can eat buffet. So we said, well, let's kind of take that similar idea, but what if, instead of going to Barrow, Alaska, what if the vampires showed up at the North Pole? And so we kind of create this irreverent comedy of a vampire infestation at Santa's workshop. And so that was the initial idea we toyed with, and went through multiple variations, and but it ended up not going anywhere. But it was, it kind of planted that seed that this was the time of year where people would love to see something different, and then this ghost tradition is such a good way, and just get some people something different to do. And I am hoping there were, and so part of my decision this year was I wanted to do one that sort of had a name to it that people would be familiar with, and you can't get much more famous than The Innocents. At that name, for younger viewers or viewers who aren't familiar with the Henry James original, in 2020 it was the basis for the Netflix series The Haunting of Bly Manor. That was Mike Flanagan's. It was this follow-up to The Haunting of Hill House, and so he went from one of the great American ghost stories to then one of the great British ghost stories of The Turn of the Screw, to adapt in that serial version. So I think a lot of people are familiar with that. And then just I think in the same year there was which I will not recommend. There was like a major motion picture called The Turning, which was an attempt, kind of modern adaptation of The Turn of the Screw, which starred Finn Wolfhard of Stranger Things fame as Miles, sort of the sinister boy who's possessed by ghosts, or is he? So,
can I just say to all the younger people out there, please read books. I cannot stress this enough. But in all seriousness, I do want to circle back to Christmas spirits, because another thing that got me thinking since our last conversation was was about the potential of producing original material.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, have you had any sort of, I don't want to say temptation, but have you had any sort of inkling or to maybe get behind the computer screen and maybe type out an original for next year, or at this point, are you just gonna be a bit more conservative and kind of stick to material that people sort of know already?
It all kind of comes down to I'm always interested in that. I mean, I have probably 7 or 8 ghost stories right now in several stages of completion. It's just looking for the right pairing of ghost stories, or the right time to do them, or some of them just need some work, because a lot of what I'm doing now I've been adapting a lot of existing ones, because I thought there's so much out there. I mean, there's so many ghost stories out there, and so many of them are great, and people don't know them. There's only been a few of them that really have kind of transcended, whether it's the A Christmas Carol, or even The Signal Man. It's probably one of the more famous ones, or The Turn of the Screw, or more modern, Susan Hill's The Woman in Black. Are ones that people know, but there's so many that they don't know that are really, really great stories. And so right now I've been trying to kind of look for ones that I think, not all of them can work on stage. A lot of these ghost stories are just so action heavy, which you're like, well, gosh, it's on stage, shouldn't that be the idea? But there's not a lot of dialogue, and so it's and that's just a whole other thing, to try to bring a story that has no dialogue in it, where it's one person in a house experiencing things. We're finding a story where you do have some strong characters that could work in the medium of stage, and so it's kind of finding those stories. The American writer Edith Wharton has some amazing ghost stories. and there's one of hers that I'm pretty close to being done on, but it's finding, where that would fit in, because I don't, whether I'd want to just do one that focused on American writers of ghost stories, because there were American writers who also, were writing ghost stories. And do 1 year, just do all American ghost stories, or what I do just a night of Edith Wharton. So there's just it's things thinking kind of in those elements. But I read ghost stories all the time. I'm a member of several different ghost kind of literary ghost story groups on Facebook, and I always love it when someone says, "Hey, everyone, what's your 5 favorite?" And I start looking at the list and saying, "Oh, I haven't read this one yet. What about this one?" And add them to my list to read to see if they could possibly work on stage. So that's always a part of it, and I would love to do some more original ones next year. But the good thing is there are existing ones there that if I'm not able to get something down, I can kind of pull from.
So I want to circle. So I want to go back to the Innocents for a moment, because you said, I think you said next week. That's when everybody needs to lose the scripts, and that's when you're going to start getting into it. In terms of set design, like, or I mean, is it very minimalistic, or what kind of, or I guess what kind of setup are you looking at, or have you come up with in order to tell the story that you want to tell?
Yeah, so that was one of kind of the challenges of bringing this work to stage, because the original play version that played Broadway was anticipating you having this massive stage, and so in the stage directions in the script it talks they're in this massive like sitting room of this country estate, and there's like a staircase in the middle that goes up to a landing, and we're doing the show kind of in this little basement black box that seats 80 people, so there's and the ceiling from the top of the stage to ceiling is probably like at most 7 feet. So, we're not, there'd be no stairs going up to anywhere. So one of the challenges for for the director was being able to take what's on the page and kind of re-envision it in the space that we have. Because I felt like there was, if there was something where there was some required element or something that happened where it had to have that, then I probably would have chosen a different show. But other than just people walking up there was nothing that I felt was core to the script that said you absolutely have to have this big set to do this show. So it is going to be relatively minimalist. We're going to kind of create the sitting room on stage. We have a few flats back there with a hallway behind, and then kind of the sides. It's not a high stage. The stage itself is probably at most like a foot off the ground. So we're going to take sort of the ground areas on either side of the stage and use those as playing areas as well to kind of serve as the gardens around the house, where a lot of times when the ghosts are seen, they're seen through the windows looking out into the garden. So the audience is sort of going to be like, it's almost like the audience is sitting in the gardens themselves, kind of watching through the windows themselves of the action that's happening inside of Bly Manor. And we're going to try to, I just, last night ordered a sign, a Bly Manor sign that we're going to hang on the entrance to the theater. So essentially, as you're crossing that threshold, you're walking into the estate of Bly Manor.
So basically the audience that they become, voyeurs.
In a way, yes. Gotcha. I mean, it's not, it's not immersive theater any more than just that. But that's sort of the way to kind of, take what's on the page, still make it work, but be able to translate it into a space that does have limited, limited things you can do with set and effects and things like that. So, I'll be designing the lights for the show, which will be. That's going to be interesting because the lighting will really, that'd be the one way that you can really help set the mood and kind of add to that feeling of dread and suspense.
Yeah. So which then leads me to the next question. So because you're going for a minimalist approach, I'm assuming there isn't going to be much in terms of like set changes, right? I mean, everything's kind of,
Yeah.
I mean, everything's just going to be like as it is, but it's going to
Mhm.
require a lot of imagination on the audience part to sort of go with, the actors,
Yeah.
let's say from the garden to, to the study and then to the drawing room,
Yeah.
right?
It's very big. We're calling it Victorian minimalism. So, which sounds like an oxymoron, but yeah, I mean, it's, but I'm hoping that the material is strong enough and the performances are strong enough where the audience isn't even going to think twice about there not being this elaborate, ornate set. Because you can have the most ornate set in the world, and if the show could drag if not acted or staged well. So I'm hoping that the performances will transcend whatever our technical side will be. But I don't. But as I said, I don't think it hinders the story, and I think the audience will be enwrapped in what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, especially with a story like The Innocents, because it has such a great track record, both as a story and as a
It
film.
does. Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I mean, you can't really go wrong.
Right. I mean, it's such a fascinating story. I mean, when it was first published, in 1898, it was, everyone just took it at face value as this just straight ghost story. There were no questions that there were ghosts in it. But then as the years went on, it sort of had this reevaluation where kind of looking through the lens of mental health. And was Miss Giddens, or as her name is in the show, in the original story, she's never given a name. Are there really ghosts, the ghosts of the former garden, the former valet and the former governess haunting and possessing the children, or is it, or is Miss Giddens imagining it? Is this all in her mind because she's isolated, out in this country house with these kids, and the pressure of doing that, is it getting to her, and is she projecting these ghosts that aren't really there? So it adds this whole other layer of intrigue to the story, which that was what The Innocents in 1961 did such a great job, and what Deborah Carr did such a great job of playing Miss Giddens in that production was adding that kind of ambiguity to it. Is she seeing ghosts, or is she the horror that's being enacted on the children, or is it these two malevolent spirits?
Right, and really good performance can kind of build that tension too, to where the audience can sort of start to feel and start becoming a bit uncomfortable because they've ceased to be spectators and they've become participants in that, in that scene. So real quickly, I want to ask you, so when it comes to directing horror theater, what sort of cues or what sort of elements go into making sure you get the best performance out of an actor when you're performing in a medium where frankly you're kind of naked, figuratively speaking?
Well, I mean, some of it is just it's looking at, because each script is unique, and so you get to approach each one differently. Like if you're approaching Grand Guignol, the temptation is to keep your acting style heightened, but not to the point where it's parody or it's over the top or it's campy. And I think that's the fine line a lot of you have to work with is finding the appropriate level, because if you're too subtle, then it falls flat. If you're too much in the other extreme, then it's campy. So you want to find that right kind of mix to get across either the horror to keep, or the tension. I mean, obviously, sound effects and lighting, have a lot because they can fill in a lot, of the gaps. Perfectly placed sound cue can really help, or dim lighting, or even using things like candles and things. It just adds to that on stage. Other thing is if you have effects, it's just not skirting the effects or skirting rehearsal time for the effects. It's getting those things in as early as possible and just drilling them over and over again, because they can make or break, because they have to be second nature. So it's like when we did Catch the Butcher back for our October show, there were a couple of effects in that, and it was like, let's get the props, let's get the prosthetics, let's get everything down in as soon as we can, so we can just rehearse and rehearse and rehearse. And it was really funny because we had an effect in there that we were concerned maybe didn't look real enough, and so we tried, let's try to add some like things on the set to kind of shield it enough, or maybe the audience won't notice. And then we get there to the actual show, and it was because we were so close to watching it every night. We knew that an effect was coming, so we were ready to look for maybe what looked a little uncanny valley, but the audience was not. And so I never, every single night of the performance, I never heard the audience whisper or point or anything. And because they weren't expecting there to be an effect at that point. And so part of it was just us, was that rehearsal time that we spent to kind of get it to that point. That it went great.
So the Innocence premieres December 14th and runs to the 17th. So what I'll do is I've got the website up right now. I'll put it in the description below, and I'll share it on social media just so people can check that out, because it's a really, really fascinating thing that you're doing, Chris, and really I salute you for doing it, because honestly, I mean, honestly, we really don't get enough of Halloween, because Halloween comes in and it's just more of a drinking holiday, really. And even then, I think what you're doing is maintaining a very, very ancient tradition that that's just forgotten about. That's unheard of, here in the States, and is also going by the wayside in Europe. So I mad respect to what you're doing. So once Christmas Spirit ends, what's the what's next on your slate in terms of production?
Well, we have a little bit of a gap then, so I'm looking at some, trying to find some ways to kind of fill in the gap with something. I don't have anything lined up yet that I can announce, but I'm hoping to get something kind of in that between Valentine's Day, early spring time slot. But then in June, we will be. I'm gonna say right now it's the local premiere, because I don't think it's been anyone else has done it around here, but we're going to be doing the musical Death Takes a Holiday in the very end of June, which has a beautiful. It's one of these horror adjacent, I call, stories, because there's not necessarily scares in the traditional sense or gore or anything like that. But I mean, the main character is the Grim Reaper. So I think that in itself and death is a large part of the story. But it's a beautiful soaring melodies, romantic story. And I think audiences will really enjoy it. And especially because it's not something they would not have seen it before. It played off Broadway briefly in 2011. It's by a composer named Tamara Yeston, who wrote the musicals Nine and Titanic. So great Broadway track record. The book was written by Thomas Meehan, who also wrote the book to Annie and co-wrote the book to the producers with Mel Brooks, and then Peter Stone, who wrote probably the greatest book of all time for a musical, the book to 1776. So it's a really talented creative team who wrote the show. If anyone has seen the movie Meet Joe Black from 1996, this is based on the same source material. The premise is death, kind of comes to take the soul of this young woman who's just been in a car accident, but for some reason he is stopped in his tracks and is unable to take her, and so she survives. And he's perplexed by that and decides, for the first time in history, he needs a vacation. So he's going to spend the weekend with this family to try to explore these feelings he's feeling, which of course eventually develop into love for this woman. And of course, the neat thing is that during that time, no one, since death is kind of off the clock, no one in the world has died, and so it is a whole different, neat little layers to the story. There's an elderly couple, and she's been suffering from, dementia, and as death has been removed from the world, she gradually then recovers, and the fog is lifted, and there's this sweet story between these two older individuals, which a lot of times you don't see in the musical. So that's sort of what we have coming up. That's our big musical for June. It's definitely the biggest production that we've taken on to this point. So lots to get ready for that, but we're really excited to get to present it.
Another question I wanted to ask you that I didn't get the chance to ask you back in October. I mean, currently, you guys are based out of the Old Courthouse Theater in
Mhm.
Concord. Um, at some point, do you foresee any plans of moving shop to like another theater or another city?
Um, I mean, I never say never to anything. I love OCT. That's the theater I grew up in. And much like we talked about the Grand Guignol with how much atmosphere can add to the show. I mean, it's just the absolute perfect venue for this type of theater, whether it's on their main stage, which once again in a converted church building, or down in this basement black box, which just getting into that space, it already has a little bit of unease to it. So I love that venue. I don't think I'll ever at this night I have no plans to ever leave there, but obviously I do 3 shows a year. There's room to do more things, and OCT does their own shows throughout the year, so there is opportunity if I to do things elsewhere throughout the year. And because I mean I would like us to be kind of a regionally relevant theater company, because no one's doing what we're doing. So I would I don't want to see pigeonholed to be Concord's horror theater. I kind of want to be the region's horror theater. But whether that's taking a small show that we can kind of pack up in a in a box and hit the road with, whether it's like I had written an adaptation of Spoon River Anthology the other year that we did in a graveyard. That's something that we could do in communities all over the area. I mean, as we grow and as kind of my options increase based on growth, then I mean, kind of the sky's the limit on what we can do. But I love OCT and I love being in that space, and I really feel like there's no reason. Once again, Mad Monster Convention is in Concord every year. It's massively packed. There's no reason that people can't make a special trip to Concord to see horror theater, make that kind of a special trip that's worthwhile for them, and really add to help develop and and infuse money into the Concord art scene.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just because I mean, you guys have the misfortune of being close to Charlotte, also, so that kind of so you're kind of overshadowed by us.
Yeah.
But what I would really love to see you guys do, and this comes from an interview that I did with the Shakespeare actor a few months back. What I would really love to see y'all do is maybe take your show out on the road. First go around like the Charlotte metro area, and eventually tour like the Carolinas. Because I think that'll be amazing for you guys. Well, also because too the fact that there's so many parts of North Carolina that have their own ghost stories. What I thought would be cool was that you traveling to like say Asheville and doing a play about the Gray Lady, for instance, or the Ghost Lights.
Yeah, so I mean, you're you're revealing some of my secrets. No, I'm just joking. That's one thing I've thought a lot about, because obviously North Carolina has such a rich ghost story tradition. I've had this. I really want to write some theater that takes some of those stories and creates theatrical versions that could tour. We have maybe 3 core plays and then some that we can kind of substitute, or maybe have kind of a list of shows we could do in rep. So no matter which area of the state we go to, we'll have a ghost story that can be on the slate that is relevant to that region.
Right.
So it's one of these things where down the line, grant writing to work with a playwright who could help do some of these things. Because a lot of these, it would take some with a little more skill as a playwright than myself. I can take existing things and do some adaptations, but when you're kind of starting from scratch to write something, I really would love to work with some playwright to develop something that could even something that's appropriate to even just tour into schools who are learning, like in middle schools who are learning North Carolina history, to add that other layer. I mean, one of the things that really hooked me into all of this was a class I took in high school. For my junior year in high school here in Concord, I took a class. It was called American Studies, where they combined kind of junior English with junior social studies and history, and we put them together. And because that we had a longer class period and we could do all kinds of cool field trips. And for Halloween week, we did a thing called One Dead Week in American History, where it was a lot of local legends and ghost stories, and we toured a lot of we took a field trip to tour some cemeteries, and we did gravestone rubbings, not gravestone robbing, gravestone rubbings, and that I still have somewhere that project here, because it was just such a cool thing that really just blew my mind. And I still feel like a lot of my interest in history and kind of haunted history, a lot of it comes down to stuff I learned that week, or learned, when I was in elementary school, going to the library, I would check out North Carolina ghost stories, and just fascinating. So yeah, that's something I would love to do. I thought about, for Halloween, when doing something kind of like I want to call like a theatrical haunted house, where maybe I take some of these local legends and turn them into almost like the haunted house experience, where you walk through a space, but each room you're seeing a different part of the story or a different local legend, and try to find a way to make it immersive where the audience kind of can participate in what's happening, and do something like that. So it's / part educational, but then also, a different experience for people to have at Halloween or any time of the year, really. So those are all things that are right in my wheelhouse, on my bucket list, or things I really, really would love for us to do at some point.
Excellent. Well, we're gonna go ahead and wrap it up here. Like I said, this year's Christmas Spirits is gonna debut from December 14th to the 17th, and I'll have the link down in the description below. But Chris, I can't thank you enough for taking the time out of your busy day to be on this podcast, and I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to watch this episode. And we'll catch you on the flip side. Bye.